Sally Smith has kept a diary since she was 10 years old. She has a record of her daily life for the past 30 years. If you ask her what she was doing on a particular day 5 years ago, she can tell you. Every night before she goes to bed, she enters in her diary what she has done that day. If she has had a boring day, she writes only 1 or 2 lines. If she has had a really exciting day, she writes a whole page or more. Sometimes when she is bored, Sally reads one of her old diaries. In her early teens, she wrote mainly about what she had done at school that day. The diaries she wrote in her 20s are the most interesting. She worked for an advertising company and met lots of different people during the day. In the evenings, she had a busy social life. She went out nearly every night, to parties, bars, restaurants, the cinema, or the theater. But she still managed to find time to write about it all in her diary.
Reading passage 2. This passage is about the daily life of a factory worker. Jack Lee lives alone in an apartment on the edge of the city. He works in a factory that makes computers. During the working week, his daily life follows a fixed pattern. He gets up at 6:30, has a wash and a shave, then cycles to work. He has breakfast at a cafe on the way. His job at the factory is easy but boring. He is glad when he can stop for lunch. He has a sandwich and a cup of tea with some of his friends. Then he goes back to work until 5 o'clock, when it is time to go home. On the way home, he buys a newspaper to read during the evening. On his days off, however, Jack's life is completely different. Sometimes he remains in bed until 9 o'clock or later. Then he gets up and prepares his breakfast, thinking about what he will do that day. If the weather is good, he might go fishing in a nearby river, or he might go for a long cycle ride in the country. If the weather is bad, he might take a bus to the city center and go to the museum or the library. Or he might be invited to tea with his daughter and her family. These are the days that he enjoys most of all.
Troubles. Before you read. 1. Are you often in trouble with your parents? 2. Have you ever broken something valuable? Reading passage 1. In this passage, 2 boys find themselves in trouble for something they didn't do. Sam and Tom Lee were upstairs when they heard their mother call them. She was downstairs in the lounge. They knew from her angry tone of voice that they were in trouble, so they went at once. Mrs. Lee was standing by the window. Her favorite ornament, a china horse, was in pieces on the floor. "Which of you broke this ornament?" she asked. "It wasn't me," said Sam. "I've been out all day. I only got home 10 minutes ago." "It wasn't me either," said Tom. "I came into the lounge to fetch a book this morning, but the ornament was still in one piece on its shelf when I left the room." Just then, Mr. Lee walked in carrying a tube of glue. "I've come to mend your china horse," he said to his wife. "I accidentally knocked it off the shelf when I opened the window at lunchtime. I hope you didn't think one of the boys was to blame. It wasn't their fault." Mrs. Lee looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry I shouted at you," she said to Sam and Tom.
Reading passage 2. This passage is about dealing with the troubles of everyday life. English people sometimes say, "A problem shared is a problem halved." This means that you should not keep your troubles to yourself. You should tell someone else about them, such as your best friend, your teacher, one of your parents, or another relative. There are two reasons why this is a good thing to do. Firstly, the other person might be able to help you to solve your problem. Secondly, just talking about what is troubling you often makes you feel better. When I feel worried about something, I always talk to my aunt. She is my mother's sister and the nicest person I know. She is never too busy to listen to what I have to say. Sometimes my friends laugh at my problems, but my aunt never does. She understands how I feel. She can also give me good advice because she has had plenty of troubles of her own in life. Her husband died when their only child was just 2 years old. She had to work long hours to earn enough money to live on. This made her ill, and she had to spend several months in hospital. When I hear about these things, I realize that my own problems are really not very important.
"14. The world of numbers. Before you read. 1. Are you good at mathematics? 2. Have you ever used an abacus? Reading passage 1. This passage is about working with numbers. In mathematics, you learn how to work with numbers and do sums. When you do an addition sum, for example, 6 plus 2 equals 8, you add numbers together to find the total. When you subtract numbers, you take one away from the other. For example, 6 minus 2 equals 4. Multiplication is adding a number to itself a particular number of times. For example, 6 times 2 equals 12. Division is finding out how many times one number can be subtracted from another. For example, 6 divided by 2 equals 3. It is useful to be able to do these sums in your head, or on a piece of paper. However, for thousands of years, people have used other things to help them count and calculate. The oldest of these is the abacus. This is an instrument in which you move beads along rods or wires in a frame. One of the most recent is the calculator. Some lazy people use a calculator to do sums they should be able to do in their head. They think it is the best way of avoiding mistakes, but you won't get the right answer on a calculator if you press the wrong buttons.
Reading passage 2. This passage is about remembering numbers. Many people find it difficult to remember numbers. Here is a method that I find helpful. For each number from 0 to 9, I think of an object that has something to do with the number. For example, 0 looks like an egg, and 1 looks like a stick. The figure 2 is a pair of glasses, which has 2 parts. The figure 3 is a triangle, which has 3 sides. The figure 4 is a frog, which has 4 legs. The word frog also begins with the same letter as 4, which is another way of remembering it. The figure 5 is a 5-pointed star. 6 is an ant with 6 legs, and so on. I make a picture or story with these objects to go with the number I have to remember. Here is an example for the number 4251. I think of a frog putting on a pair of glasses to look at a star and pointing at it with a stick. It's a silly image, but silly things are often easy to remember because they make you laugh. If I want to remember the number 603, I imagine an ant laying an egg in the middle of a triangle. Can you think of useful ways of remembering the numbers 7, 8, and 9?
"15. Encyclopedias. Before you read. 1. Do you have an encyclopedia at home? 2. What do you most often use an encyclopedia for? Reading Passage 1. This passage is about buying an encyclopedia. Mr. and Mrs. Lee went to the bookshop to buy an encyclopedia. There were so many different ones that they did not know which to choose. Even the smallest one was a heavy book, with 1,000 pages. Some of them contained too many entries for a single book. They were in sets of 2 or more volumes. The largest set had 20 volumes. It was far too expensive for Mr. and Mrs. Lee to buy. A shop assistant came to help them. "What do you want to use the encyclopedia for?" she asked. "Our children, Sam and Tom, will use it for their homework," said Mrs. Lee. "And I will use it when I'm doing crosswords, to help me find the answers. I will use it to find out more about the things I've seen on television," said Mr. Lee, "such as countries that are mentioned in the news. I will also use it to write questions for the quizzes we have at the social club I go to." The shop assistant took a 3-volume encyclopedia off the shelf. "I think this is the best set for your family," she said.
Reading Passage 2. This passage is about a woman who has a wide range of knowledge. People call Mary's grandmother a walking encyclopedia because she knows so much. She could probably write an encyclopedia on her own without the assistance of anyone else. When she takes part in quizzes, she always wins. She knows the answers to all the questions and never gets anything wrong. "How do you know about so many things?" Mary asked her. "There are 2 reasons why my brain is so full of facts," she replied. "Firstly, I never forget anything I read or hear. All the knowledge I get from books or television programs is stored in my head. I particularly like reading life stories, so I know about many famous people and what they have done. Secondly, I have had a long and interesting life, doing many different things. When I left school, I became a nurse, so I learned a lot about health and medicine. Then I married your grandfather. He was a naturalist, that is, a person who studies plants and animals. His job took us to many different parts of the world, where I learned about the countries and their wildlife. Then my sons were born, your father and his 2 brothers. They liked all kinds of sport, so I learned the rules of many games from them."
"16. Beyond time and space. Before you read. 1. Do you like looking at the stars in the sky? 2. Have you ever been to an observatory? Reading Passage 1. This passage is about what you can see in the night sky. Anna and Kate lay on the grass looking up in the night sky. When I was younger, said Anna, I used to think that the stars were tiny holes in the sky, where the light shone through them from the other side. Now I know that they are huge bright things. Some of them are much larger than the sun. The light that we see left them a long time ago because they are many light years away. I like looking at the patterns they make and trying to recognize the different constellations, said Kate. I visited an observatory with my father earlier this year. We were given a booklet with pictures of the most famous ones. I think I would like to study astronomy when I grow up and learn about all the different planets and galaxies. I wonder how big the universe really is, said Anna. Scientists say that it is getting bigger and bigger all the time, but— Wow, what was that? Cried Kate, interrupting her friend. I just saw a flash of light moving across the sky much faster than an airplane. It was probably a meteor, said Anna. If we watch carefully, we may see some more.
Reading Passage 2. This passage is about a creature from another planet. Do you think there is life on other planets? No one knows for certain. But people like to write stories about the possibility. I read one of these stories last week. The dead body of a strange being had been discovered in a forest. The scientists thought it must be an alien, that is, a creature from another planet. They took it to their laboratory to examine it more closely and do some experiments on it. The alien's head was about the same size as that of a human adult. However, its brain was much smaller, so it was probably less intelligent. It had eyes at the front, back, sides, and top of its head. This meant that it could see in all directions at once, so it did not need a neck. When the scientists opened up the alien's body, they found that it had no heart, lungs, or stomach. It obviously did not live by breathing and eating as we do. The creature had 4 arms. One pair was at the top of its body. The other pair was where its waist would be, if it had one. Its legs were shorter than ours. It had no knees, so it could not bend them. Its feet were wide and flat, with 10 toes on each.
Pollution. Before you read. 1. Is there much pollution in the area where you live? 2. Have there been any major environmental disasters in the news recently? Reading Passage 1. This passage is about a major environment disaster that happened more than 40 years ago. The Torrey Canyon was a large oil tanker. In 1967, it went aground on rocks near the southwest coast of England. The crew were rescued, but the ship was badly damaged. Oil spilled out, polluting the sea and causing a major environmental disaster. Oil does not sink to the bottom of water. It stays on top. A large patch of oil, called a slick, floated on the surface of the sea. The waves carried the oil to beaches in England and France that were popular with tourists. Sand and rocks were covered with the dark, sticky substance. The wildlife also suffered badly. Birds that dived into the water to catch fish got oil all over their feathers. Some of them died, but others were rescued by people. They used detergent to clean the oil off the birds' feathers. Detergent was also sprayed on the oil slick. Unfortunately, the detergent added to the pollution in the water, killing fish and other marine animals. It was a long time before the affected parts of the coast recovered from the disaster.
Reading passage 2. This passage is about pollution in the city. The air is cleaner in the countryside than it is in the city. In the city, the air is polluted by things created by human beings, such as motor vehicles and factories. Cars and trucks burn fuel to make their engines work. This process sends harmful gases, which we call fumes, into the air. The fumes that come from factories are not only caused by burning fuel. Sometimes they come from chemicals used to produce the things made at the factory. Inside buildings, the air may be polluted by the smoke from people's cigarettes. The water in rivers and streams is also cleaner in the countryside. It is safe to drink the water from many mountain streams, but you would not want to drink from a city river. Chemicals from factories pollute canals and rivers that pass through the city. People throw things into the water, causing more pollution. Many countries have introduced laws to reduce the pollution caused by all these things, but it remains a serious problem. It damages the environment and harms people's health. This is why many people like to live and spend their leisure away from the city center.
Hobbies. Before you read, 1. What are your hobbies? 2. Do you know anyone with an unusual hobby? Reading passage 1. This passage tells you how some of the pupils in Miss Smith's class spend their free time. Miss Smith asked the pupils in her class about their hobbies. She was surprised by some of their answers. People usually expect girls to enjoy activities such as sewing or knitting. They expect boys to prefer things like model making or playing computer games. But Miss Smith's pupils are different. For example, Paul is very fond of embroidery, and Jane is in the middle of building a model boat. Some of the pupils said that their favorite hobby was reading. Others said that they would rather play games with their friends or family. Anna Lee and her friend Kate are keen chess players. They were taught by Anna's father, who was once a national champion. He has a special set of pieces that he carved himself from wood. Woodwork is one of his hobbies. Tom and his friends like outdoor activities. They go fishing together in the summer. In the winter, they play football. Tom is very good at this game. He would like to be a professional footballer when he grows up. Then, football will no longer be his hobby. It will be his job.
Reading passage 2. This passage is about the different types of hobbies you can do. A hobby is something that you do for fun in your leisure. This is the spare time you have when you are not working or at school. Hobbies help you to pass the time in an enjoyable way, so they are sometimes called pastimes.